I'll be breaking my talk into 4 sections. There'll be some introductory remarks. Then I'll turn to the subject of alleged curses in the music industry, then in alleged curses associated with the film industry, and finally there will be a sort of concluding section. I'll be using the term curse in a broad sense. If one talks of a curse, one generally will probably think of someone who doesn't like someone else. The person who's launching the curse or initiating it performs some sort of ritual aimed at harming the other person or group of people by psychic means. However, it may be that malign influence doesn't always require a cursing ritual. It could be, for instance, that simply having negative thoughts and feelings about someone in itself could be sufficient to have a bad effect. Even if there isn't a conscious wish that the targeted person suffer any hardship. So there are various possibilities. Therefore, I'll be using the term curse in a fairly broad sense. Another thing that has to be borne in mind is that with reports of alleged curses, often there's no explicit evidence that there ever was a curse. The existence of a curse is sometimes an inference made on the basis of what seems to be a disproportionate amount of bad luck. For instance, the Kennedy family, the political family, have experienced over different generations lots of deaths and misfortune, and also people associated with them through marriage. And it's been suggested that there's a Kennedy curse. Now, this is an inference, in a sense, because so far as I'm aware, there isn't any known report of people explicitly cursing the Kennedys. I suspect many people have thought negatively about them, but the idea of a Kennedy curse is an inference rather than perhaps an established fact. And this brings me on, of course, to the subject of how we use words. We use the word curse in everyday life, often in a non-literal sense. If Mary goes out with a new man at the weekend and reports back on the encounter to a friend at work and says something, oh, he was a great guy, but gosh, his breath stank. Oh, what a curse. And in that sense, the word curse simply means something unfortunate, not a psychic ritual aimed at harming someone. Sometimes it's not clear whether people are using terms literally or metaphorically, and this applies to the word curse. For instance, the expression, the Kennedy curse, it may be just a journalistic tag to refer to the fact that the Kennedys have experienced quite a lot of bad luck. It may not be intended literally to imply a curse. Again, with the group Led Zeppelin, which I'll be mentioning, people sometimes talk about the Led Zeppelin curse. And again, this could be one of those situations where people are either meaning they believe there was a curse or possibly was a curse, or simply that the band or members of the band had some bad luck. Now, I'd like to distinguish between 2 types of curse. What I first call it is a type 1 curse, is where some sort of ritual is performed or negative thought is directed at someone, or where it's assumed to have done, evokes some sort of hostility. And then the target of the so-called curse or presumed curse is afflicted with disturbing paranormal phenomena. A type 2 curse, on the other hand, is where the target, the victim, if you like, experiences a disproportionate amount of bad luck, which is attributed to the negative thoughts, feelings, or intentions of the person who instigated the curse. Some curse cases, if we regard them as genuine, may entail both paranormal and the bad luck aspect, so both type 1 and type 2 may be, in a sense, mixed. And it could be that if they really do exist, type 2 curses are simply subtle versions of type 1 curses. For instance, imagine 2 friends, let's say Jill and Sue, fall out. They've been friends for years, but they have an unexpected falling out. And Jill says to Sue, "I'm into black magic, I'm going to put a curse on you." And a couple of days after this argument and this statement by Jill, that Sue is out in her car and collides with another vehicle and winds up in hospital with a broken leg. Now, if we assume that this was a result of a curse, you could say that the accident itself was a paranormal event, in that maybe subtly something influenced Sue's concentration when she was driving, or maybe the steering wheel was just jerked slightly too much to the left or the right, which caused it to collide with another vehicle. So it could be that type 2 curses are essentially type 1 curses. But I think this distinction between type 1 and type 2 is helpful in sort of keeping the subject tidy. I'll give you very quickly, it's nothing to do with the film industry or music, but a case of an ostensible type 1 curse. And this is from a case from Edinburgh. In 1936, Sir Alexander Hayes Seton and his wife Zayla were in Egypt. I think they were there primarily or wholly for sort of archaeological or historical interest, going around to tombs and seeing the pyramids, that sort of thing. During this trip, they went on a privately arranged excursion to a tomb where Zayla, the wife, surreptitiously took a piece of bone from a skeleton. I think the piece of bone may have been the sacrum, a bone at the base of the spine at the back of the pelvis. Eventually, the couple returned to their home in Edinburgh with this item. And they had some people around for supper one evening, and as the guests were leaving, a piece of the roof parapet fell down quite near the people. No one was injured as far as I'm aware, but it was, I suppose, a close thing. Subsequently, ghostly phenomena occurred at the Setons' house, noises and minor poltergeist-type effects. On one occasion, Seton's nephew, Alistair, saw a strange figure ascending the stairs. These phenomena continued intermittently for some weeks or months, and eventually it was arranged that Seton's uncle, who was based at Fort Augustus Abbey, would come to the house and perform a ritual. Now, I don't know whether this was he was, by the way, known as Father Benedict at the Abbey. Seton himself wasn't a Catholic, but his uncle obviously was. The uncle came to the property, performed the ritual, and then Seton incinerated the bone, burnt it, and the poltergeist-type phenomena ceased. However, as he put it, from 1936 onwards, trouble always seemed to be around the corner. As you can see from the years of Zayla Seton's life, 1904 to 62, she didn't even make it into her 60s. And the same was true of Alexander Hayes Seton. I don't know what the cause of death was. I think they both had 3 marriages. I think their marriage to each other around this time was, I think, their first marriage. Whether this turbulence in their marriage and that kind of thing was anything to do with the curse, of course, is questionable. Now, at first sight, this case does seem to be a fairly interesting one of a possible type 1 curse. One could say that somehow in stealing the piece of bone from the skeleton in Egypt, some sort of ancient curse had been invoked, which manifested itself in the form of poltergeist or ghostly phenomena. Another possibility I think we should consider is that the phenomena at the Setons' property, if genuine, were essentially of an ordinary haunting or poltergeist type, but that the phenomena adapted themselves in such a way as to give an impression that there was a curse operating. Because one of the facets that runs through many poltergeist and haunting cases, if not most of them, perhaps all, is a tricksterish aspect. The phenomena seem to play games with the people who experience the phenomena. So it could be that the focus on the object, on the bone and so on, was intended to give an impression of a curse, and it was basically a kind of ordinary, if I can use that term, poltergeist incident. This argument can go either way. You could say a supposedly ordinary haunting or poltergeist case could actually be a curse. Maybe, someone has it into someone, and that's what's resulting in the phenomena. Conversely, it could be that these type 1 curse-type cases could be essentially ordinary hauntings or poltergeist incidents. This is just for your interest, Learmonth Gardens in Edinburgh. I don't know which property they lived at in the street. This area is about 2/3 of a mile roughly north of the West End of Edinburgh. Now, turning to the music industry, there are lots of sort of rumors of curses and supposed curses. And to be frank, I think the evidence for the existence of curses in this sort of area is questionable. I'm not saying there haven't been genuine curses. But one story about the music industry, focusing on sort of rock stars and well-known singers and performers, is that the age 27 is sort of peculiarly dangerous. And the reason for this is because various well-known performers have died at that age. And this has given rise to the notion of a 27 club. And if you die at 27 and you're a famous rock star, you now become a member, a so-called member of the 27 club. And I've listed here, as you can see, some well-known artists and performers who died at that age. But you'll notice, and you probably know anyway from your own reading and knowledge, that a lot of these people indulged quite heavily with substances of one form or another. For instance, alcohol or heroin. And you could say, well, rather than seeing something spooky about the age of 27, maybe it's simply because these people are in the business, they're living the rock and roll lifestyle, overindulging, accidents and so on will happen. Another consideration is that there are many famous rock stars, performers, who die not at 27. I'm thinking of Buddy Holly. I think he was only about 22 or something when he died. I can't remember his exact age when he died. John Lennon was 40 when he was shot dead, or fatally shot. He died shortly after being shot in New York City. A study published in the British Medical Journal looked at famous musicians, or well-known musicians, and it did find that there was a sort of a raised, heightened incidence of death in their 20s and 30s. But as I say, this could be well attributed to lifestyle factors. A very small blip of risk was found for the age of 27, but similar blips were present for the ages of 27 and 32. A couple of people who died at 32, you've probably heard of. John Bonham, the drummer with Led Zeppelin, he was 32 when he died. And Keith Moon of The Who was 32 when he died. In both cases, the deaths were alcohol-related. I think both these men inhaled their own vomit after drinking heavily. So I don't think, frankly, there's too much to this sort of rumor of a 27 club. I want to mention Aleister Crowley, the occultist Aleister Crowley, not because he's a prime focus of my talk or anything, but there's a connection between Crowley and Led Zeppelin, which I'll be discussing in a moment. Very briefly, Crowley was born into a Plymouth Brethren family, but he rejected his parents' Christian beliefs and dabbled with what's known as Western esotericism and mystical traditions and rituals and so on, and established his own religion. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but I think there may be different ways of pronouncing it, but Thelema, I'll go with that. That may not be the best pronunciation. As you probably know, he bought a house beside Loch Ness called Boleskine House on the southeast side of Loch Ness, which he thought would be a good place for carrying out rituals. This house was subsequently bought by Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, who was a great Crowley devotee. Crowley owned it from 1970 to 1990. Page of Led Zeppelin owned it from 1970 to 1992, but he didn't actually spend much time there. So Led Zeppelin were formed in 1968. They're generally described as a rock group, but their sort of musical styles covered different genres. It include blues, rock itself, and sort of country or folk rock. Even their rock stuff has a kind of heavy blues leaning. They were extremely successful commercially, and some people describe them as the greatest rock band ever. These things are personal. I think the Who were better than Led Zeppelin, but people would question that. But to me, I've got a few of their records, but I don't find there's more than one or two tracks maybe or two or three tracks on any given album that I really like. But they were very, very successful. John Paul Jones, the bassist, and he also played keyboards and maybe other things as well. That's not his original name, that's a stage name. I think his real name is Baldwin or something like that. The group came to an end in 1980, effectively, when John Bonham died, as I've mentioned, by choking on his own vomit. And it's been suggested, and not very convincingly in my opinion, that Led Zeppelin suffered a curse. And there are two theories about this, two explanations of why there might have been a curse. One thing, and as far as I'm aware, this is nothing more than a rumor, I don't know that it's been substantiated, is that Jimmy Page supposedly persuaded two other members of Led Zeppelin, the vocalist Robert Plant and the drummer John Bonham, to enter into some sort of occult arrangement that would help further the interest of the band. Whereas John Paul Jones declined to enter this arrangement. And with this idea of using occult powers or forces or influences to benefit you, there is this idea that there can be a downside. It's a sort of Faustian pact. If you do it, you may run into trouble later. And this could be the cause of the trouble. And in the case of Jimmy Page, there's another possible source of a curse, which I'll mention briefly. Now, problems affecting Led Zeppelin. Robert Plant, he's the vocalist, or was the vocalist, was injured in a car accident in 1975. His wife, Maureen, was driving the car. They were on the island of Rhodes in Greece. The car, I think his wife missed a bend and they came off the road, and the people in the car, some of them at least, were injured. Jimmy Page's daughter Scarlett was in the car, but I think she came out of it largely unscathed or completely unscathed. But Plant was injured, and it disrupted the touring arrangements for Led Zeppelin for a while. Worst was to come for Robert Plant. In 1977, tragically, his 5-year-old son developed an acute or sudden virus, a mysterious virus infection, while the band were performing in the United States, and he died, which must have been quite a distressing time in his life. At least one or two of the members of the band overindulged on substances of one kind or another. As I've said, John Bonham died as an alcohol-related way. There are also plagiarism claims about Led Zeppelin, and some of this came to sort of fruition after the band ceased to kind of exist, maybe as Led Zeppelin. Plagiarism, as you probably know, is where you rip off someone else's material and pass it off as your own. For instance, a student writing a thesis, if the student comes across a book and decides to reproduce 10 paragraphs from a textbook or something and pass it off as his own writing, or her own writing, rather than using quotation marks or making it explicit that it's a quotation, that would be regarded as plagiarism. Two types of plagiarism, basically: conscious, that is where it's done deliberately and cynically, or deliberately, and unconscious plagiarism, where, for instance, you've listened to some music in the past, you've forgotten about the music, and in composing a new song, you've drawn on that sort of subconscious memory of the song, but you've forgotten maybe that you've actually been influenced by that song. Some years ago, I had some guitar lessons. I still am a lousy guitarist, but one of the songs I asked my tutor to teach me was "Here Comes the Sun," the George Harrison song recorded by the Beatles. And sometime after that, I was sort of playing around on the guitar, and I came up with a little riff or something. I thought, that sounds quite good, and I was patting myself on the back for being sort of more musically creative than I thought I was. And then I realized it was a chain of notes from "Here Comes the Sun." But you can imagine if I'd published that song, it had been successful, and then someone said, hang about a minute, McCue's ripped off "Here Comes the Sun." And there have been some well-known legal actions where people have been accused of plagiarism, which may have been unconscious plagiarism in some cases. But Led Zeppelin certainly faced some accusations. Their first album, just simply called Led Zeppelin, had some records, had some tracks, and that didn't recognize some of the sources that they seem to have drawn on. I think in subsequent issues of that album, they've changed the credits. And I suspect if his name is added to a credit, that person then takes a slice of earnings from the sales. However, I don't think that we can regard plagiarism claims as bad luck. I mean, if you've ripped off someone's material, either deliberately or unconsciously, it's not sort of some mysterious thing that's sort of descended on you as bad luck. On the other hand, Robert Plant's experience with his 5-year-old son could be classed as bad luck, and you could say, well, perhaps there was a curse involved. But it could, on the other hand, just be one of those tragic things that does happen. And also, as I've noted, the band did have considerable commercial success. Now, going back to Jimmy Page, the guitarist with Led Zeppelin, he had this fascination that I've mentioned with Aleister Crowley. And in 1973, he met a man called Kenneth Anger at a Sotheby's auction. I think they were both bidding for a bit of Crowley memorabilia. And because of their shared interest in Aleister Crowley, they got talking and became friends. And Page agreed to produce some music to accompany a film that Kenneth Anger had been working on for some time, called Lucifer Rising. However, time passed, and according to Kenneth Anger, Plant didn't supply as much music as he required. For his part, Page alleged that Kenneth Anger hadn't kept him apprised of things. He needed to see the whole of the film or something before he could complete the work. They blamed each other in that respect. Another gripe that Kenneth Anger had was that Page and his then girlfriend, a woman called Charlotte, hadn't treated him with much courtesy. You know, he wouldn't, not as much as giving him a cup of tea or a sandwich. And Kenneth Anger announced that he was cursing Page and his girlfriend, Charlotte. Now, whether there was a curse or whether it had any effect is conjectural. And if you go back to these problems affecting Led Zeppelin, some of them preceded Kenneth Anger's association with Jimmy Page. So it's difficult to really attribute these things to a curse, unless one assumes that a curse can work backwards in time. A third curse rumor or story about Led Zeppelin concerns an Essex group called Eddie and the Hot Rods. Now, Eddie and the Hot Rods, the Eddie of Eddie and the Hot Rods was a dummy that used to appear on the stage in their early performances. It wasn't the name of actually a member of the group. The group's membership has changed over the years, and until his death, not so long ago, the vocalist was the only consistent member of the group for some time. Now, in 1977, Eddie and the Hot Rods released a single called Do Anything You Want to Do. It was a sort of up-tempo pop rock number. You can find it on YouTube. It alluded to Aleister Crowley's dictum, couched in sort of very formal language, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And an image of Crowley appeared on the record sleeve with Mickey Mouse ears, and these were put on by the group's manager, Ed Hollis, who co-wrote the song. The other person who was involved in writing the song was the then guitarist, Graham Douglas. Now, it's rumored, and I don't know whether this is more than a rumor, that Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin got to hear about this and thought this was treating his sort of his figure, hero figure, Crowley, with disrespect, and that Page then cursed Eddie and the Hot Rods. As it happened, Eddie and the Hot Rods didn't have any more success as they had with Do Anything You Want to Do, and things took a downturn for them, and eventually they were dropped by their recording label. Ed Hollis, the manager, subsequently, I don't know whether he had a heroin problem then, but subsequently he had a heroin problem and eventually died of an overdose of heroin, but I think that happened after he was no longer involved with Eddie and the Hot Rods. So this, you could say, okay, there was possibly a curse here, but it's unclear whether there really was a curse, and if Page did curse the group, whether the curse had any effect. I was given the name of Jimmy Page's public relations company by a music journalist, and I contacted this company via their website, asking whether I could put some questions to Jimmy Page about these matters. Unfortunately, I received no reply. To be honest, I wasn't really expecting a reply, really, but I didn't get one. I also contacted Paul Gray, who'd been the bass player with Eddie and the Hot Rods around the time they released Do Anything You Want to Do, because he was quoted by a journalist as saying that a lot of weird shit happened to the group around that time, and people said we shouldn't have, to use the word, fucked about with Crowley. And I was interested in what this weird shit meant, whether it meant paranormal phenomena or whether it meant bad luck. And I contacted Gray, and he was courteous enough to reply, but he said he'd rather let this one lie now. So, it's a little bit uncertain whether there's anything to this or not. I'm getting a bit short on time now. How much time have I got left? 21, sorry, I misread it, yes. Yeah. Turning to the film industry, quite a few films have been associated with bad luck, where members of the cast or production members, crew members, have suffered misfortune around the time of the making of the film or subsequently. I don't have time to really to go into more than perhaps one, and I'll focus on Rosemary's Baby. This was written and directed by Roman Polanski, based on a novel by Ira Levin. I don't know if that's right pronounced Ira, but I think that's probably right. The plot outline, it concerns a character called Rosemary Woodhouse, played by Mia Farrow, who is impregnated by Satan and gives birth to his son. Now, numerous deaths and mishaps occurred around the time of the making of Rosemary's Baby. Now, when I give a talk, I don't normally like to read from notes, but I'm going to read my next bit from notes just so I get the details right. Some of those who helped create the film went on to experience misfortune, as I've said. Christoph Kameda, who contributed music for the film and was a friend of Polanski's, was involved in a tragic accident in December 1968. During a drinking party, he was accidentally pushed off an escarpment by a writer called Marek Halasko. Kameda incurred a cerebral hematoma, that's a head injury, and remained in a coma until his death in April 1969 at the age of 37. Halasco himself died about 2 months later, aged 35, possibly of an accidental overdose of alcohol and sedative drugs. William Castle, the producer of Rosemary's Baby, was assailed by hate mail. In April 1969, he was troubled by kidney stones. In a delirious state in hospital, he reportedly had hallucinations related to the film. Although he recovered, he didn't produce another Hollywood hit. On the 9th of August 1969, along with 4 others, Roman Polanski's heavily pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, was brutally murdered by members of a cult known as the Manson family. Tate had sought the lead role in Rosemary's Baby, although Paramount, the film company, decided to cast Mia Farrow instead. Nevertheless, Tate appeared uncredited in the background in one of the scenes. According to an article in the magazine Vanity Fair, Polanski last saw his wife in July 1969, and he noted in his autobiography the thought that he'd had at the time that he would never see her again. But Polanski's travails didn't end there. In 1977, he was charged with drugging and raping a girl of 13. In a plea bargain, he admitted to a lesser offense, having sex with a minor. But in 1978, he fled from the USA to Paris after learning that the judge intended to reject the plea deal and sentence him to prison rather than grant probation. When she became involved in Rosemary's Baby, Mia Farrow was married to the singer and actor Frank Sinatra. Farrow had planned a role in his film, had a planned role in his film, The Detective, but the shooting schedule for Rosemary's Baby stretched out, and she had difficulty managing the schedules for both films. Rosemary's Baby won out, and Sinatra demanded that she choose between him and her film career. When she opted to complete Rosemary's Baby, he got his lawyer to deliver divorce papers to her at the film set. As I've said, Ira Levin was the author of the book on which Rosemary's Baby was based. He attracted criticism with the Catholic Church, condemning the film for mocking religious persons and practices. His first marriage ended in divorce in 1968. In a 1992 interview, he confessed to having mixed feelings about Rosemary's Baby. He seemed to regret that his work had helped to popularize a rational belief in the occult, witchcraft, and Satanism. However, his book didn't send his career into a nosedive. On the contrary, subsequent novels were the basis for the acclaimed films The Stepford Wives and The Boys from Brazil. The Dakota, an apartment complex in New York City, featured in some of the filming for Rosemary's Baby. On the evening of 8th December 1980, the former Beatle, John Lennon, was shot and fatally wounded in the archway of the building. He and his wife, Yoko Ono, had an apartment there. In terms of the distinction between type 1 and type 2 curses, there's also an alleged type 1 aspect to this case. Nick Redfern, who hails from the UK but now lives in Texas, is a well-known researcher and author of books on anomalous phenomena. In his 2018 book, The Black Diary, he cites incidents in which people have had strange experiences in connection with watching Rosemary's Baby, simply listening to the associated music, or after reading the novel on which the film was based. For example, an acupuncturist called Alison told him of a strange incident that occurred in California in 2010. She was lying in bed, watching the film at night in a motel room. There was a loud knock on the door, which alarmed her. After a few seconds, she tiptoed to the door. Looking through the spy hole, she saw 2 boys in black hoodies and wearing black jeans. In a raised voice, one of them asked if they could use the phone. They were holding their heads low, meaning that Alison couldn't see their faces well. But moments later, she was able to, and she saw that their eyes were completely black. However, I imagine that many thousands of people have watched the film over the years, and most likely without experiencing any such creepy phenomena. The odd occasion when it happens will be much more likely to be reported than the many times when it doesn't. Certainly, I've watched the film myself, and I don't recall anything strange or creepy happening, and I imagine many of you have watched as well, perhaps also without experiencing anything untoward. On the night of 5th November 2016, Nick Redfern watched his DVD version of Rosemary's Baby. Several hours later, around 8:30 a.m., he spotted what he deems to have been a man in black walking along a path near his apartment block. He managed to take a photograph of the figure, which is included in his book. To me, though, the man doesn't look particularly sinister, and his attire doesn't appear to be noticeably black. For example, there's a light-colored band around the hat that he's wearing. So here we have one of this film that I've cited as an example, where you have various deaths and mishaps, giving rise to this sort of idea or myth even that the film was somehow cursed. But without our being told who did the cursing, if anyone. I think we need to take into account that films, maybe including Rosemary's Baby, do involve quite a lot of production crew and actors and actresses. And if these actors and actresses span, a wide range of years, for one reason or another, you're perhaps likely to get the odd death or someone falling ill during the production, and this happening to the production crew as well. So conclusions. In many cases, the notion of a curse may be a speculative influence. And in evaluating the evidence, we need to take account of selective reporting. I've already pointed that out, as I say, with Rosemary's Baby. Thousands or even perhaps millions of people have seen the film, and perhaps with the majority of them, nothing has happened. Just very briefly, to go off the subject of films, another example where this sort of selection problem comes in is there are cases of people sending items back to places that they've taken them from, feeling that they've experienced bad luck after acquiring them. To the east of Inverness, there's a site known as the Clava Cairns, where there are some large cairns made up of many stones, and these cairns date back about 4,000 years. And some years ago, a Belgian man posted back a rock that he'd taken from the Clava Cairns, thinking, took it home as a souvenir item. But then some bad luck afflicted him and the family, and he inferred that this was because he'd acquired this item from this ancient site. And he posted the item back to the Tourist Information Centre in Inverness. One of the staff there actually kindly returned the item. But the problem here, of course, is we don't know how many other people may have taken items from the Clava Cairns without experiencing any bad luck. It's hard to know. Similar cases from elsewhere. In Hawaii, Volcanoes National Park, you're not supposed to remove minerals and bits of coral and so on, but there have been cases where people have done that, subsequently felt that they've been sort of cursed because they're experiencing a lot of bad luck, and then they've either sent the stuff back by post or even physically taken it back themselves to try to sort of undo the bad effect. Now, with many type 2 bad luck curses, there may be normal explanations for what's occurred. As I say, for instance, with the rock industry, people dying young, or Led Zeppelin and that kind of thing. If you're living in a culture where there's a lot of self-indulgence, heavy use of drugs, risky lifestyle, accidents, death, and so on may well occur. Finally, if curses are real, the intention may not always be just to punish. There could be a ways of trying to get the offender, if I can use that term, to make reparation. For instance, to go back to the Seaton case, it could be that if we take this as a curse case, that the phenomena occurred not because there was some inherent wish from some intelligence to punish the Setons, but to get them to send that bit of bone back or take that bit of bone back to where it came from. In that case, it obviously didn't work because the piece of bone wound up being burnt. So, as I say, the aim of the curse may not necessarily always be punitive or entirely punitive. It could be to induce the people to make reparation. Well, I'll stop now and in case there are any questions. Thank you very much.